Richard Liew here, editor at NZ Entrepreneur magazine, and today I'm stoked to be talking to Nuwanthie Samarakone. She's the founder of ICE. ICE is a talent development agency, and she's grown that from right here in New Zealand, Auckland to be specific, and is now operating, I believe it's across 6 countries. So yeah, quite an achievement. So we're going to chat today with Nuwanthie, a bit about her business building journey and see what sort of secrets we can pull out for all you founders out there. So Nuwanthie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
So your journey's been quite an interesting one, and I'm really looking forward to this chat. Can you just quickly, though, tell our viewers a bit about the business you've built? That's ICE.
So ICE is an acronym for Inspire, Create and Engage, Richard. And what it essentially does is it works with organisations to help attract and develop young people, early careers, into their businesses, and look at developing the skill sets that the organisations are going to need based on the countries they operate in, the types of markets they operate in, but also the types of customers they're attracting and building as well. I was going to say it started off as well based on my own journey as a young graduate coming out of university and realizing that there wasn't always a straightforward pathway or opportunity to land your first gig. You know, you come out of university, you've got your piece of paper, which is great. You're rearing to go. You kind of want to be the CEO. There's also different, I guess, aspirations and alignments in terms of values that you might feel you can bring to an organization. But at a very young age and stage in your career, you don't always know what you don't know. And so the challenge for a lot of young people is how do you find that first pathway, or how do you even realize what your key strengths are? So the idea just fell upon me, really, where I was looking at my own journey and I thought, hang on a second, there's definitely a space and a place for helping young people work out what their core strengths are, but also working with organizations on the other side to ensure that they are geared and ready to not only attract and welcome these young people, but also have the right structure and the right framework to develop them so that they don't just lose them after 2 years of, you know, supporting their growth.
Now, you did a health degree, I believe.
I did.
Yep. And so what I'm hearing is that the genesis of this business idea came from you observing a problem that you came across, having gone through, the system, if you like, and coming out the other end as a job seeker, and then trying to, navigate that pathway, as you say.
Absolutely. And I think, education in some ways is no longer linear in my mind. So you come out of, you go to school, you come out of school, you get a university degree, and then you look for a job. And that's kind of the pathway that society have, I guess, in some sense constructed. But actually, if you look at your own self, it doesn't always have to be that linear. So one of the things that I guess for me personally was like, yep, I went through that process. I ended up graduating as one of 1,000 other students. And it was during the GFC in 2008. So there was hardly any grad jobs going. So I was quite lucky and felt really humbled to have incredible managers in the health sector as well that kind of supported me through the program, but also coached me and mentored me on the side to ensure that I was, building myself, but also equipping myself to be able to add value at your earliest when you're in that graduate position. And I looked around my peers and I thought, well, hang on. Why are they not fast tracking? Why is there no development? Why is there no structured coaching and mentoring? I mean, we use those two words interchangeably, but there's drastic differences. And so that was when I realized there was a massive gap in the market, not just in the health sector, because the health sector traditionally as well would attract clinicians, but then what about the non-clinical talent who also need to keep the system going? But I realized that was going across technology, across banking, across professional services firms. And then I thought, okay, there definitely is something here. But then the question was I going to give up my job at like 22, 23 and chuck away that corporate world, some level of security for trading to something that was totally unknown, and it was an idea. But I guess when you take a step back and now on reflection, I think, that's, I guess, how entrepreneurs start, or the life of an entrepreneur starts. You've got to take that first step.
And I can totally relate to that, having studied finance at university and then gone straight out of the system and found a job, soon found myself, being an accountant, which it took me a few years to realize I absolutely hated that. And that was my genesis for figuring out what the heck I wanted to do next, and led to me starting my first business, actually around the similar age, I think. So it intrigues me because here we have someone who's done all the right things. You've gone through school, you've obviously excelled to the level that was expected, or maybe more, went through university, position yourself for getting ready for a nice long career in an established and very worthwhile industry, in the health industry. You've worked in both public and private health organizations. And then you decide to go and chuck all that very quickly to go and do an entrepreneurial thing. So what was that process like for you? Was that a sort of, a moment where you had to sort of grapple with your identity, maybe? What did the people around you say when you said, oh, hey, that nice, safe, secure job I've got, which I'm shaping up to, progress through very nicely. Well, I'm leaving that aside and I'm going to go and do this other thing. And I don't know if it's going to work. What would you, on reflection, have told yourself back then, if you could?
I think the first thing, if I'm being really honest, was, yeah, great idea, but I'm not here to save the world and everyone else's, career pathways, I think. And I remember sort of taking that conversation to light with my parents, but also with my managers. And I said, it is an important gap. I think there's an opportunity to fill that. But at the same time, as you said, Richard, I'd worked my butt off to get to where I'd got to at, 2021. And I knew I was progressing really well. And I loved what I was doing. I love the health sector. I still do. It's such a core part of our whole world in terms of our economy. And it really felt like I was letting go of something. And at 22, 23, I guess the conversations I was having was more around, am I ready for something like that? Do I even know if I've got the skill sets to be building something or starting something? But what I found was the more I talked about it with my managers or with some of my key mentors, they were sitting me down and saying, actually, if you're going to give this a go, you want to start now. And if it's going to fail, hey, you're going to learn a heck of a lot from that versus, it just, going gangbusters in year one. And I remember thinking, ooh, really? And then the question was around, do I have what it takes? Because you don't know what you don't know as well. When you're starting out, like, it's a blank canvas, right? And so, but having people validate that or confirm that they felt I could do it was incredible. And I remember sitting down with my senior manager at the time, and he basically said to me, you're finishing up in a few months. You've got to get out there and build this idea out. And hey, if it fails, you've got a job with us. So you can always come back, but you've got to test it out. And that was when I was like, okay, I've just got to take the plunge. So, and I did. I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful I did. And it's not to say the journey or the ride's been, seemingly amazing every single moment of it, because there are moments when you just kind of think, gosh, what have I done? But at the same time, it's so rewarding. And when you start to make an impact with, really helping young people in their early part of their careers and their lives, really, and you can start to see the generational change it's making for some people, for some young people as well. It's high impact stuff. It's so rewarding. So yeah, but it all started with, I guess, people telling me that I should just give it a go. Right. And I do that now with others. I'm like, just do it, just try it out, because you just don't know.
Now, can you explain for us what exactly was the process? What did you do to actually start the business and get it going? I mean, what did it look like? Was it just you? How did you get customers? Did you even know what you were going to deliver them?
I think as soon as I had that meeting with him, I remember going home, I decided, okay, I'm going to cut every single bit of cost that I've got that I'd ever incur. So I moved back home, used my parents' study. Because I had 2 months, and he said, you got 2 months to get moving. And that was quite a nice way of defining time as well, because otherwise you can move your idea and it can be kind of a forever thing. And it would just be a dream or an idea forever. So I moved back home and I decided to write up a business plan. It had to be structured in my mind, and that's, I guess, in some ways how I operate. And pinning something down physically also, whether you're writing it literally, means that it's quite a powerful statement to say, right, I'm actually going to do this, and I've got to invest in myself to do this. So I worked super early, like I'd start work at 7 or sometimes like 6:30 in the morning and finish up at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I've got the evenings and the late afternoons to go and network and meet people and have conversations around, okay, here's an idea, but you're a potential Mr. Customer. What do you think? And do you think this would work? And what would work for you if I was testing this out in New Zealand? So that was like my day. So I'd work early, finish off at about 2:30, sometimes 3, and then I'd be out the door, knocking on other company doors and meeting people and getting a real sense of what was the why would I do this, but also how would they want this translated in their respective businesses, so that it wasn't that I was just rolling something out because I felt it was the right thing to do. I also spent a lot of time at Auckland University, because that was where I graduated from, particularly in the health sector, health sciences division, out on the Tamaki campus, working out what was going through young people's minds in terms of interns and graduates, and what were they looking for as well, and what did they feel was missing. And a big part was that first internship or grad program opportunity, because it was a numbers game, it was a volume game, and even at the time during the GFC, those numbers dwindled. But also, what skills did they know they even had? And most young people, and I remember thinking to myself, yeah, well, I didn't know that I was confident in this or good at this, or you just don't know what your strengths are. So I realized that if we're going to design a company, it really had to be based on people's strengths, because you can always leverage off your core strengths and build things around it. But if you work around this is what I'm missing, well, you're always going to focus on what you can't do or can't be, and you might never be that. And so that was my it gave me so much exposure to how young people think. And, I was young enough, but it felt like I journeyed way more than, someone straight out of university. But also getting a lens on what sectors were going to grow or develop more. And health was obviously going to be something that I was always going to go back to in terms of my focus, but also what could we link up with or build around the health sector as well. And so that was kind of my early days of trying to match that. Once I'd done that, I then, that was basically 2 months was up. My father gave me this really good book called Don't Compete, Tilt the Field. And so he gave me the book and he said, my advice to you is you give yourself 7 months to make it or break it, so that you don't just run with this really cool idea and this dream of wanting to help young people, because you've got 2 customer segments as part of my business model. It was the corporates and businesses, but also the young people. And so 7 months was kind of what he said you should do. My 2 months at Southern Cross Hospitals was up, and then I finished up there, and then I basically went straight into like my kind of plan. And I was knocking on doors and meeting people, and yeah, look, you don't know what you don't know, like I said. And so, when you're talking to a potential company or a potential somebody, ultimately, I think my biggest learning, if I reflect back, and even today, is just be you and be really human and be really open to saying, I don't know what I don't know in terms of the types of, things you're looking for, but let's talk this through and let's work out a model that might work for you.
The key thing I pulled out of that is that when you had the idea, basically the next thing you did after that was go start talking to people who may be customers and asking them what their problems were, whether or not they would use a service like you were thinking of. And in a way, you're pre-building your potential customer list before you'd even open the business, right?
I didn't really know I was doing that though.
Can we fast forward a little bit then? So I take it that you basically did all the groundwork yourself initially, went out and got the customers, figured out how to deliver them the service, and sort of built as you went, learning as you go.
And what I did, sorry to cut you in for a second, but what I also did do from day one was I set up an advisory board, and that consisted of some of my senior managers that have worked with me, that knew me well enough, but also people that I've sort of captured as mentors that I felt could just have some straightforward conversations with me, because I think sometimes as a founder and as an entrepreneur, it's very lonely. It can be very lonely, but it's also, it's your idea, it's your passion subject. So you end up just kind of going for it, but you miss your blind spots straight away. And I was quite determined to have people around me that's going to just have super frank conversations, and I was willing to have that and take it as well. And I think one of the things I say to other entrepreneurs sometimes is you've got to be open to hearing those blind spots, and it's not easy, but it's important.
What happened next? How did you start to grow the team out, and then how long was it between sort of establishing the business and then opening your first overseas office?
So Singapore happened 18 months into starting here in Auckland, partly because of the types of clients we were attracting in New Zealand. And then we realized that in order to really scale in New Zealand, we had to go offshore for funder investments, but also build the brand out to work with more multinationals that we were starting to capture in New Zealand. And that was by learning too, because every corporate or multinational based in New Zealand was a small satellite. And it was Australia that headed up New Zealand traditionally, and sometimes still is. And Australia was headed up by Singapore or Hong Kong. And so I knew I had to get to Singapore. I also knew that I had to, in order to really drive strategic change when it came to talent pipelines, for businesses, regardless of size and scale, you've also got to bring in some overseas thinking. And to do that, you've got to be based overseas. And so it so happened that I met with a couple of guys out of the UK, literally online, and they said to me, great idea, love what you're up to, we'd invest in you, but you've got to move over to Singapore as part of the whole thing. So at that point, I had 2 people in New Zealand that worked for me, one part-time, one full-time. And it was kind of it was a little bit like, oh my gosh, I've got to go overseas, but I've still got to keep New Zealand going because we've got, a base number of customers here. But the best thing I did, I guess, was going overseas, setting up shop there and bringing in some of that thinking back into New Zealand and Australia off the back of that, and enabling us to scale using technology, driving a good process across the business as well, so that you can actually sustain something and scale it. And again, having fabulous board members around the table that were just really committed, I guess, and passionate as well, and really engaged with the why and what we're doing.
So now you're operating in, I think, 6 countries altogether. Where else have you got offices?
We've got an office in Sydney in Australia, and Australia's a larger market compared to New Zealand, but it's smaller compared to Singapore. So we've got Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong. I've got a service office in Colombo in Sri Lanka, because as you would know, Richard, Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong are hugely expensive. And so in terms of trying to manage time, but also time zone issues, but also cost issues, we decided to set up a little center in Sri Lanka, which meant we could drive some of the process work and the volume work that we do for some of our clients out of Sri Lanka to cover China. And then San Francisco is another little hub for us. That's the only part of the US that we've touched, predominantly because we do work a lot in the technology space. So San Fran's kind of been our little hub, our little space. And then the UK. So the UK is where I guess we get a lot of thought leadership coming from, because it's just a market that is so much more ahead of the game in terms of talent development, talent attraction, I guess, given the size and scale of the market, really.
Right. Now, was this all part of the grand plan when you first set out?
No. No. The short answer is no. No, I don't think I ever thought that big, or my head could think that big. But I think at the time, I remember saying to myself, you've just got to trust the process and let things flow. But at the same time, it was great having my board members and advisory board members who were kind of pulling the brakes and the handbrake and saying, really, yes or no, why, and pushing me to really pin down the why. And that was really helpful. So no, the short answer was no, but I guess client demand happened. So out of Singapore, you know, I was in and out of Malaysia. We started working in the pharmaceutical sector, which obviously Singapore, Malaysia was big for us, given my health background. Banking, finance, insurance happens in Hong Kong predominantly. So in order to really tackle the global players, we had to be there. And then Hong Kong also happened because we started working in China. And I had the tricky decision and choice to go, do I set up a joint venture in China and build a business out there, or do I run China out of Hong Kong? And cost, and also lack of market trust, but also lack of understanding that country. You know, it's just so big. I was like, I'm not prepared to live out of a suitcase for the rest of my life and tackle that one. And like, you know, you've got to also come back to your grassroots and use the likes of NZTE and Callaghan Innovation and talk to individuals who are in markets as well and help get, I guess, advice, but also get a steer in terms of what has happened in the past for businesses that have gone overseas and set up in those markets. But also I personally didn't want to scale too fast. It was just not you can scale fast and die fast. So we got asked, I know, out of Hong Kong from a major bank whether we'd set up in the Middle East. And as much as that sounded super exciting and super cool, I made the choice not to. And that was, again, because you've got to find that fine balance of the right size of a business as well. And I didn't want to, I mean, global domination was a great thing or a great concept, but the realistic aspect of it was going to be different. And so we had to, you know, there were times when you just have to literally make that call, and it's tough because ultimately it sits with you as the main founder.
Now, there's going to be founders watching this who are thinking to themselves, man, that's where I want to be, you know, at some stage. And you've recently stepped down sort of from the operational side. Now, how on earth do you set things up that you are able to do that? Because as is the case with many people who start businesses, they soon find themselves in a position where everything relies on them. And if the founder stops working or gets sick or wants to take a holiday, the whole business comes grinding to a halt. What advice would you have for founders who are hoping to one day basically be able to step away from it and have their business continue successfully?
So I think that if I just tell you a quick story, one of my little catalyst moments for that was everyone talks about the drop dead theory, or the, you know, if you're not here tomorrow, what happens in terms of your business. And I remember flying into Malaysia and flying out the day before the flight went missing. Is it 375? Say flight 375, you know, that flight. And it's still, you know, in some ways unaccounted for. And I remember landing in Singapore and then hearing the news, and I had my parents and my family and my friends around, you know, from New Zealand hitting me up going, oh my God, are you okay? Because particularly my close, you know, networks knew where I was at the time. And I remember sitting in Singapore, literally, I just landed and I was like, oh my gosh, like that was just a moment where you sort of suddenly think everything does rely on you. And this whole equation without you there could fall over. And so that was my moment when I thought, right, I've got to structure it in such a way that means that if I ever stepped out, or if the drop dead theory was to play out, that what we'd built was still going to carry on. And as part of that process, attracting the right people from day one was really important. I'm not saying I got it right because I haven't and I didn't, but I've learned from that. And that was a really important part of bringing the right people with the right values, but also ensuring that, you know, everyone really buys into the why and the vision of the business. And when you know you're making an impact for hundreds, sometimes thousands of young people, and if that gets you out of bed, you know you're in the right space, in the right company. So it was the people. It was about making sure the process was seamless, regardless of who was in those roles and places as well. And as part of that process, we also introduced the opportunity for anyone to take in shares in the business. So it wasn't just a paycheck fortnightly, because, you know what, I don't think the world works that way anymore, and I certainly didn't want it to work like that. The other piece is around technology. So making sure we were using tech so that, you know, the concept of working from home, or the concept of like simple things, meant that you end up preserving and looking after your people and the process so that you can scale and it's more sustainable long term. It also meant that when you're setting up in Asia Pacific, you know, some countries like Vietnam can have very patchy internet, you know, to start with. So it's like, how do you ensure that your clients are future-proofed as well? So by thinking that way, it meant that we had to future-proof everything we were doing. And I'd always said to my board and to my senior team that I couldn't see myself doing what I was doing forever. And the reason for that, Richard, was because I want to keep learning and growing myself. That was one. Secondly, in order to innovate, you can't have the same thinkers or the same heads around the table. And I didn't want to be that founder that ended up staying for like 25, 30 years and almost run the idea to the ground, because you don't see the new opportunities. And so it's partly also, I would say, a generational thing. I mean, the young people coming through now, the generation alphas after the Zoomers, have very different views of what makes them tick to enter their first gig or enter their first job. And so that was about, I guess, me not being selfish. And I think I remember my board members saying to me, you're quite different to a lot of founders, because a lot of founders, you know, it's almost like their thing. And I get that. And it's not to say I don't feel like I've kind of stepped away, but at the same time, it's important to empower others to drive it forward as well, and be open to new ideas and new thinking without being the center of it all. So yeah, but I think structure, process, and people and making sure that that life goes on without you. And so I'm still on the board. I am still involved in it strategically, but I have to say, like, even the last 18 months, having some things come up that the guys are doing now, the guys and girls, it's fascinating, because I'm like, geez, I wouldn't have seen that. And that's like one example of like this whole new space or whole new world that we're diving into, perhaps in New Zealand or in Singapore, that if I was at the helm, I would not have come up with it. Or been bold enough to try something that different, or yeah.
Well, Nuwanthie, it's been absolutely an awesome pleasure to talk with you. So many useful insights there for founders watching this. Do you have any last messages for people watching?
I think one of the things that I've always held on to, even at an early stage in my sort of journey, starting up a company, but then also, you know, exiting or stepping out of it from the day to day, is that as tough as it is, it's the tough people that survive. And as a founder or as an entrepreneur, you've got to believe in yourself to be that person.
Thank you so much. That was Nuwanthie Samarakone, founder of ICE, talking to us today from Auckland. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Richard. Great to see you.